Hi, this is Chris Kubiak from the Audubon Society of Western Pennsylvania. I'm a naturalist with Audubon here, and today we're going to talk about trees here in Western Pennsylvania. As you can hear, we're starting to get into the spring season here in Western Pennsylvania. We've got various birds returning. We've had some grackles and red-winged blackbirds and killdeer here. So we're going to talk about some of the trees in the ecosystem that are really important to a number of not just birds, but other animals in the ecosystem. And the one we're going to talk about here, this is the white pine, known as Pinus strobus. White pine is a really important component here of our ecosystem and our forests. And this specimen that you see here was actually we got from Audubon's or ASWP's Native Plant Center. And so we planted here about 5 years ago. You can see this is a really well-growing tree. Pretty neat tree for a lot of different reasons as well. The eastern white pine is actually, the Iroquois refer to this particular tree as the tree of peace. And it is a big part of a lot of their cultural components and how they believe that the Five Nations came together and sat under a white pine. They also called their enemies the Adirondacks, which means pine bark eaters, which is Iroquois for pine bark eaters. But this is a really neat tree. It's got a lot of neat aspects. Believe it or not, both Native Americans and early colonists actually used the pine needles for making a tea. It actually has more vitamin C than lemons and oranges if you can concentrate it in a tea. So it's a good way to ward off scurvy. All right, so now we've moved out into the wilds here in Western Pennsylvania to look at some mature eastern white pines here. As you can see, this is a pretty old specimen here, though this is a fast-growing tree. If you look around over here, you can see these trees grow very straight, and they're great for lumber. They are cut and have been cut for a long time for lumber. Interestingly enough, during the colonial period, the king of England would come through with his people, not him personally, but his people would come through and put an arrow that would mark these white pines for the crown's use. As you can see, they grow very big and very straight, and they would use for masts in the old square-rigged ships. What's cool also is these trees here that you see, these white pines, are really good for a lot of bird species. Further north, I mean, their range runs from the Appalachian Mountains all the way up into Canada, Nova Scotia, and as far north as Newfoundland. And a lot of birds actually use these trees to either reproduce or to find insects. Two species that I really like a lot, you can see the pine cones here from the white pine. The red crossbills and white-winged crossbills will actually use the pine cones and use their bills to actually get under there and with their tongues pull out the seeds and eat them. So a really important tree that we have here. And of course a lot of other different species, everything from squirrels, red squirrels that will also eat the pine seeds. Humans can actually eat them too. They're okay, they're not as good as the western pine seeds, but they are edible. And as I mentioned before, some Indians and colonists actually ate the inner parts of the bark. They would make bread out of it. A starvation food, but nonetheless, I think something that is pretty interesting. So we got another tree here that has a really unique sort of dynamic to it. This is called a Shagbark Hickory. As you can see why it's called that. The bark kind of comes off and looks very shaggy, right? Cool thing about this is a lot of birds like white-breasted nuthatches will actually put seeds underneath there to cache them. Woodpeckers will of course use this. I've also at times, particularly when these trees are younger, see yellow-bellied sapsuckers drilling their sap wells through these trees here. Also a very important tree in the fact that they produce a lot of hickory nuts, which is known as mast. Birds don't use that, but of course squirrels and a number of other species use it as well. And what's also kind of cool is one of the bat species that is relatively rare here, the Indiana bat, will sometimes actually roost underneath the shaggy bark here in the late fall and periods during their migration as well. So really cool tree and has a really neat look, and they're relatively common here in Western Pennsylvania.